Alright, what's up guys, Zero here, and today we are here for our usual monthly tier list. Set 4 gave us a bunch of support for existing decks and introduced the main support for Angel Feather. So without further ado, let's get on the list. So just the tiers. S are the really good decks, okay decks, not so good decks, and new tier. This is the deck. These are the decks that I just don't want, that I will address just as I don't think they're good anymore, that were on, let's say, the previous list, that I don't think belong on the list anymore. So basically these are all the decks that were I put on the last list that I don't think belong here anymore. So I just throw all those decks on first. So first off is this deck and this deck, and let me see if there's anything else I want to put on here. Honestly speaking, let's put a anything else. I think Victor and this deck probably goes here too. Yeah, I think these 4 decks are, in no particular order, don't belong on the list anymore. So, Liberators I think are fine. They're not terrible or anything. Very baseline playable deck, but they're just too fair. Gurgrit sucks, has no win con, decks itself out. Just overall bad deck, waiting for actual good strides. Victor is just straight up bad Aqua Force, and even then, it's not particularly amazing. So, there's that. And Diablo also just falls in line of not unfair enough, and why play Diablo when you can play Revengers? So yeah, just decks that I don't think hold up anymore. All will go off the list just here, so people don't have to fucking ask me, hey, where's this, where's that? So there's these decks, and now we'll finally get on with the decks that actually belong on the list. Again, I'll do the usual. I'll save all the new decks for later. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.5. Where is Celestial? There we go. Alright, cool. So 6.5 new decks. So we'll go over all the old decks first. So Bugs I think belong in B. B for Bugs. Not actually, but it's to play this deck, just it's annoying more than good in my opinion. It's just this deck has too much play. The stride is what makes the deck good in my opinion, because it gets stuns their Vanguard, meaning that when they stride, this rest. But any deck that has access to anything with resist on it, i.e. pretty much any good deck at the moment for the most part, can play around this. So just having easy counterplay to your deck's main game plan is pretty just not good. And overall, if they can play around your stride, your deck is kind of really vanilla. So that's why I don't think this deck is particularly good. Not bad by any means. Very cheap, still very cheap deck to play if you always want something that's like mildly playable, but overall, I don't think it belongs in A tier anymore after looking at it a little more. Same thing with Nubas. Same thing. Just Nubas. This deck needs to like high roll a bit. Just like needs to see when to draw. This deck does not plus at all whatsoever. If the opponent sacks too hard, your deck basically does nothing. And then decks that generate enough advantage to keep up with you negging them, your deck also feels like it does nothing. So just overall, like these decks just have like flaws that make them not particularly amazing, as I initially thought they were. So definitely, I think they definitely belong to go down a tier. Next up, let's do Brawlers. So I think Brawlers are still like the bottom of A tier. Like unlike these 2 decks, which have like clear flaws to them, or a little more obvious flaws, this deck Brawlers aren't particularly amazing either. But they have a very cohesive. They have a cohesive game plan at least. So at least this deck has a game plan that can't just be super hindered by your opponent. Obviously, there is the counterplay of getting rid of your own board, but not all decks can do that. So yeah, I definitely do think this deck still belongs somewhere here around this area. You could argue like top of B tier instead, but I'll just put it here for now, just because I think these decks are slightly better than Brawlers are slightly better than Bugs and Nuba. So there's that. Borgs I do think still belong in A tier. I think this deck is still very good. Glory every turn is a pretty powerful win con. Getting to drop into cards is also really nice. And yeah, that's basically what the deck is. It draws a bunch, so you can actually play cards on every turn. A crit Vanguard that either draws you 2 if you hit them or you glory check them is very nice. And deck still having access to Legion is also really good. If you're on Black Boy, also basically tells your opponent they're not that pushy, which is just something that's there. Obviously, not every list plays the Black Boy, but if you're playing it, that is an upside. Tells your opponent that they're not allowed to take your face early at all. So there's that. So overall, relatively solid deck with a very stable game plan and a very like obvious win con to it. So yeah. That's it for Borgs. Next off, I will do. Let's do both the Kagero decks just because they happen to be here. I think both the Cross and Blade Master are relatively the same power level. I think Blade Master is probably a little bit better overall. But yeah, Kagero does Kagero things. They retire stuff. The Cross can restand and have Legion as well. But their G-Zone is very nice. If you have 4 Root Flares, your G-Zone is... you have a very good access to your G-Zone just because you have a free retire whenever you want it. New stuff is pretty nice. If you're playing the Ace and something like Blade Master, good 4th attack option to hit face 4 times, which is cool. Doesn't always come up and you don't even play it for the most part, but it's there as an option. But yeah, I will say one thing that Kagero does lack compared to a lot of other decks nowadays is they don't have anything with resist. So they don't really have a way to like mitigate damage other than like your opponent not popping your intercepts or their opponent not having ways to interact with your intercepts. But I do think not having a resist in this current meta does show up every once what's one looking for. It's obvious. It's very easy to tell that the decks with resist and decks without resist, like the difference shows. Like something like Naru's where they play like 4 Tayrok or Vanquisher, they will play 4 Tayroks just to have resist, and they still have to hard draw into it. It still shows because when you draw it into them, they can help you mitigate damage against a lot of matchups. So Kagero not having it definitely hurts in my opinion. But it's still a really good deck because they have Conroe, and Conroe can get you a free PG or tutor whatever grade ones you want. So definitely not bad by me. I still think this is one of the best, one of the better A tier decks, and that's why they belong up here in my opinion. But it is to note that they don't have resist, and that does show in some matchups compared to other decks. Next up, speaking of Vanquisher, I guess we'll do Vanquisher. I think it's somewhere here. I think these Dragon decks are very interchangeable. I think that you can put them anywhere. I just put Naru under the Kagero decks for now. Again, interchangeable, doesn't matter. Take this placement however you will. Vanquisher has the obvious niche of sticking on any deck that needs Legion, so there's that. The deck pretty good at pushing. Chai Toto is a really good card. Draws you a card, is a solo attacker, and binds them drop if that's relevant in the matchup. So overall, just a solid deck, relatively well rounded. Has Crimson to Legion if you need that as an option. So no, I don't think just much else to say. Just overall pretty solid deck. Has resist intercepts. I got a hard draw into them, but they do still have them. So yeah, there's that. Next up, I'll do Revengers. I actually, after looking at the deck, I had this deck in S tier last month. I actually think I'm gonna demote the Revengers down to the near the top of A, just because looking at it last month, I do think that was correct to put them in S tier because they were, in my opinion, closer to the decks in S tier than they were in the decks in A tier. But after the stuff we got this month, I think this deck is more in line with the top decks that I think are in A tier as compared to the decks in S tier that I'm going to put there. So, but yeah, Revengers as a deck still overall very solid. They have access to everything pretty much. Restand Vanguard, Legion. Their strides are really good. Orgasm is really good. What's the card called again? Diablo is pretty good because the deck can actually retire back row, so you can choose to choose to actually get the glory effect, unlike the other Shadow Paladin decks where if your opponent just like floods the board, your glory effect basically never goes off. So there's that, and obviously the Revenger core is still overall just pretty solid. So this deck was good since release. It's still pretty solid now, and there's not a whole lot of changes to it. So definitely top of A tier. Next, I'll do all the fish decks. I think Loris definitely belongs somewhere in this area too. I'll just leave Loris here because I'm also gonna put demote Mir down as well, because I'll explain that as I get to that. But I definitely do think duos are still by far the best deck, no questions asked. So Loris, again, I've gone over this before. I think Loris is just as a deck it just doesn't set itself apart from the other fish decks. Lower ceiling than Mir, lower kill ceiling than Mir, lower defensive ceiling than duos. All of them use the same G zone, but Loris just kind of does less than the other decks overall. So mainly that. I will say though, I've been playing the deck not because I think it's better than these decks, but because it's the most brain dead fish deck you can play. So in my opinion, if you're just looking for like a solid platter deck, I think Loris is probably the best for that, just because it's the most brain dead fish deck you can play. Just hit draw on every skill possible, draw once to counter charge, and you just do Olivia a bunch of times. But obviously that requires you to have 4 Olivias. So, but yeah, doesn't set itself up from other fish decks, but a very good brain dead ladder deck. Mir gets demoted just because I personally have been playing myself, and I think to myself, every time I want to just win, I'll just play duos instead. And so to me, it's like, yes, I do think Mir is good, but if I'm never playing it out of choice, that probably means the deck isn't as good as I think it is. That's just how I look at it. I still think the deck is good. I still love this deck, but it's just like, I don't really see a point having both fish decks in the S tier, just because I will pretty much never play Mir over duos unless the meta is like all Vanquisher, in which case I consider these two decks over duos just because Vanquisher will still find your drop zone in duos, and this deck still does need its drop zone to Legion. But we are not in that kind of meta right now, so I think duos are just better in like pretty much every way. And finally, we have duos. This deck was best deck, pretty much best deck ever since release. It was the best deck since it came out on release month. During Neon Messiah meta, it was the best deck. It fell down from grace for like a month and a half to the cross, and now the cross got gutted, and now they are back at the top because everything else still sucks, and duos are still incredibly hard to kill unless you are specifically Aqua Force. And speaking of Aqua Force, I will also put this deck in S tier. Yes, this deck Aqua Force does have counters to it, but however, this deck's ceiling is still the highest in the game. And just so they know, the most important thing in my opinion is that Aqua Force is the sole deck that deals with duos relatively well, just because they don't care about the resist, and their push power is high enough to the point where they can actually consistently force out all the guards every turn to force the duo player to actually think, can they guard this much, and can you force them into legioning instead of striding to push damage themselves. So that just being the deck that has the best possible duo matchup, in my opinion, is enough for me to put this deck S tier, because if you as a deck is like the only deck that can consistently contest the other best deck, you are probably second in line. But obviously this deck has some really atrocious, really lopsided matchups, specifically against shit like Bug does terrible against that deck, probably your worst matchup in the game, but not very common, so doesn't matter as much. But the more obvious one, the more common one is Messiah. Even though they don't hard lock your cards with something like Starbaiters, even soft locking can screw over your swap columns, so even that's really annoying for them. So Messiah is still a very bad matchup. Gears is kind of like a 50-50. If Gears get to go second and you they get first stride, if you ever have to commit and they heal down or stuff like that, they can just consistently wipe your back row or something like Chrono's command. So that could be a pretty bad matchup for you. But overall, I think Aqua Force is still just has a high ceiling in the game. Oh yeah, Neo Nectar too if they go into Jingle Flower, but decks should for the most part not be on 40, which is because they need to make space for Dream Spinning, which is a better card. So yeah. So overall, really good deck. It contests duos the best, but has some really lopsided matchups against some of the other decks. So yeah, so that's why I think this deck still belongs in S, but definitely below duos. And finally, we are at the old decks. Oh yeah, the order here for Shadows just given like, I think these two decks are interchangeable. I think these 3 decks for the most part are interchangeable. Revenger is probably better than Loris, so I'll just do it like this. Something like that. I think these two are pretty interchangeable, duos and Mir. But yeah, finally to the newer decks, Celestials. I think Celestials actually belong. We'll do Celestials first, just because they're technically not a new deck. They're just a deck that came back because of support from that was supposed to go to another deck. So Celestials, I think, belong somewhere in this range. And I actually think they are slightly better than Dragon decks. So this deck, I will say, does not have a fun match against Vanquisher specifically, just because they bind your drop and you Legion in this deck. So obvious, Legion does not do well against Vanquisher, but what can you do? It's just one deck, but whatever, right? So just one deck kind of sucks, but it is what it is. But the good points about this deck is that one, they have a good first stride, unlike Gabrielle. They have the Celestial stride that gets a crit and calls something from damage zone. They have Legion, which is good in every matchup but Vanquisher, letting you recycle your triggers, letting you put important stuff back into your deck, stuff like that. And obviously, Legion is Legion. And obviously, their GR stride, the Raphael, is very, very powerful, because just being able to choose when you want to heal is just a good effect. Like, you're at 5, you're dead to this, you're dead to X things. Just say, for example, next stage, right? You heal down to 4, and now suddenly next stage is a lot less scary, because they have to push you to from 4 back to 5 first, and if you flip a heal, you're back down to 3. So, I think Raphael, it's just as an option makes Angels really good, just because the option to heal down whenever you want is really nice. So yeah. And obviously, if you want to tutor where you want from damage zone, it's really nice. Your PGs go in there, grab them back. You want them in your hand, you can just play down like a Sariel, put a damage, no seal them back to your hand, really nice. So being able to tutor basically wherever they want is also a really strong upside, but that's something Angels have been doing forever. So yeah. Overall, very solid deck. Plays a very similar turtling game as something like Bermuda's, but without resist, which really sucks, but it is what it is. Just still overall really solid deck though. However, a deck that I cannot call solid is Gabrielle. I think this deck is probably the tail end of B. If not, I even consider putting into C. But I do think the strides do hold this deck up, mainly Raphael. Basically, Raphael, in my opinion, is boneless Celestial. They don't have Legion, they don't have a good stride, or not as good as the Celestial stride, at least, because the Celestial stride needs a Celestial Heart, and Gabrielle obviously is not a Celestial Heart. So there's that. They have to play the on-hit stride as their first stride, or the damage zone shuffler stride. But yeah, Gabrielle is honestly just Celestial, but worse than almost every way, because you don't get to play all the good options that Celestials has access to. Kind of sucks, but that's just how it is. They are actually boneless Celestials in my opinion, and I Celestials are just, if you want to play Angels, you play Celestial. Also, this deck does run the risk of deck out a lot, and being able to Legion is definitely something that's really needed in the deck. And if you're playing a Gabrielle focused deck, at most you can have 5 Legions, and with 5 Legions you will run the risk of not drawing enough of them. I won't say you can't get to them, because you can tutor them whenever you want, but sometimes you just need to hard draw them so you can tutor for other stuff, and only being able to play 5 Legions max is an issue. So that's why I think Gabrielle definitely does not belong anywhere near A tier. Has too many glaring issues, and also doesn't help the fact that Celestials are just better than them in pretty much every way. Next off, we have all the old decks that got support. So first off, I'll start with Asha. I think Asha belongs somewhere in this area too. I haven't tried it myself, and I basically never run into it, so I can't say from experience. But in theory, and from other people who do have the deck, this deck should be relatively good. I'd say it's probably around this range, probably. Where I think this stuff is probably interchangeable with these 3 decks. But Asha, Dream Spinning is very nice. Lets you get 4 attacks. The new tripper, the Maiden of Lost Memory, is insane draw power for the deck, which is really, really good. Still has the Jingle Flower for defensive option against decks that can't retire it. You draw 1 copy of a card, you get as many copies, you can get like multiple copies of that card. But that is also a downside for the deck, because if you draw too many of a certain card while you need other cards, you have no way to get to them, unlike something like Altmal, which I'll talk about right after this, where they can basically tutor for whatever they want. Overall, solid deck. I do think this deck is definitely playable now, definitely not a joke like it was before, but this deck still dies pretty hard to Naru, because if they bind all your pieces, you can't do shit about that. But overall, they have options now. Insane draw power with Lost Memory, like I said before. Dream Spinning allowing them to actually get decent multi-attacks is pretty nice. And like the deck was before, your opponent's at 5. Heal guards basically don't matter, because all your lanes are like 30k plus, meaning you hit over heal guards just straight up. So definitely a actual playable deck now at worst. It could be better. It could be better than where I put it, but it could also be worse than where I put it. So yeah, somewhere in this area. But a deck that I do think is better than them is Altmal. I think Altmal belongs somewhere here. Probably. I think it belongs probably here is probably a good spot. The thing with Altmal is really, the best way to describe Altmal, it's a very simple but effective deck. The deck doesn't do anything flashy at all whatsoever. It just calls a bunch of grade 2s, but as we all know in Zero, calling grade 2s is really good, because intercepts are how you guard in this deck, or in this game. So being able to tutor for whatever intercept you want is really nice, because that's what Aerial Altmal does. It just on stride, grab whatever grade 2 you want. You need counter charge, grab a Fragment. You want more cards, grab Benizal. You want retire, grab Blaster Blade Spirit or Blaster Blade. You want multi-attacks, grab Twin Sword. And just being able to grab whatever you want is really nice. Really big power means you never have to worry about defensives either, and the deck just runs an overall really solid game plan. Give Blade the pretty good first stride. You have ways to extend the Give Blade attack as well with Benizal or Twin Sword. So just overall, very solid deck, very simple and effective deck. Yeah, it's just simple and effective. It's good at what it does. It's good in what Zero wants you to do as a game, and yeah, just overall very solid deck. And next up we have Messiah and Chrono Jet. I'll just talk about both these decks because I think these decks roughly belong in the same area. I think both these decks belong roughly near the top of A tier. I think Mirror just being efficient makes these decks better, but something like this, I do think Messiah is better than Chrono Jet because I'll talk about Messiah first because I have a little more experience with this just because I played it more this season. But Messiah, they basically got like three if you play it, the Chameleon, the Dark Mail Chameleon. But they basically got two new cards. The very obvious one is Exelix, because Exelix is Amnesty, but your rear scale, meaning your multi-attacks are not hitting for shit numbers. They can actually connect without triggers, which is really, really good. Also retires your opponent's board, so they actually have to play cards down over those slots, which is really nice, which definitely is better than what Amnesty was before. So Exelix is a very nice finisher option, or even just as a push option. It's really nice. But I think oh yeah, and obviously the Dark Mail Chameleon just having access to a resist back row is just really nice. They can't target it, can't spin it, so they can't retire or get rid of it unless they have like a full board wipe for it. So it's pretty cool. But I think the main thing that's pretty underlooked for this deck is the Blizza, the Cray Elemental Stride that we got in the set, the double rare. And the reason that Stride I think is so good for this deck is because sometimes you just cannot do an Amnesty turn, because Exelix is GB2 and it requires you to have face-up copies of Amnesty or G to get the full effect. So, what Blizza lets you do is, on those turns where you just cannot do an Amnesty turn, you stride the Blizza, and you just turbo GB2, and by turboing GB2, that means at the end of the turn, you get to draw one with the Messiah, with the Alter Ego's GB2, which is really good because in a deck that does need its pieces to do a lot of its cool things, like your Exelix turns, or just grab cards to play down period, being able to just draw one, being able to just do like a cool, like a really slow sandbag turn into just draw a card is just nice as an option to have, obviously, because yeah, draw a card never bad in this game. So, and it's not like the deck isn't pushing damage either, because Alter Ego GB2 does let you soft block a front row, as long as it's not resist forced. Let you push damage like that to like low commit. You can just commit like one column and push for two, and then end of the turn draw a card. So very good there. Not very apparent, but I do think that having access to something like Blizza and the Exelix is really nice for the deck. And next off, Chrono Jet. The thing with Chrono Jet is that it still suffers from some of the older issues of the deck. Slow early game, still needs to hit draws to plus sometimes. But so the new toys it got are really good. Bally, 4 extra Chrono Jets if you play 4. Upstream lets you dodge annoying front row stuff like lock, or just lets you put it to the back so that if it was dying to a front row anyways, you get at least some value out of it because it's something in your back row that forces your opponent to actually like go out of the way to get rid of. So that's pretty nice there. Earn Ingon's a cool option to have if you want to play like a super like a spin heavy deck with like Relic Masters and Glimmer Breaths and stuff. And obviously the very obvious one is Next Stage. Definitely raises the ceiling of the deck by quite a bit. Best thing about Next Stage is that even if you don't kill with Next Stage, the opponent probably lost their entire hand, or at least a good chunk of it, to guard the Next Stage, meaning their crackback on their turn is a lot worse than what it would normally be, which is really, really good. And obviously, I think the biggest thing is that your early stride turns are really good too, because you can tutor for Ishin, which is a resist, meaning you can mitigate damage like that, which is really good. So very solid deck. Before I was definitely putting it like the lower end of A tier, but with the new stuff, I definitely think it belongs in the higher echelon of decks. Like if you look at it like this, I think it's a top 5 deck, which is like still really, really good. So don't think it belongs in S tier, but I do think it belongs up here with the big boys. A really good deck now. So yeah. And finally, we have Mr. Claret Sword, Mr. C for Claret last month, and I don't think that changes at all. So C for Claret, once again, unfortunate for this deck. What a shame, right? But yeah, I don't think Doom does much for the, like, obviously Doom helps the deck, right? I won't say that it doesn't help the deck at all, but I don't think Doom does enough for the deck to make this deck any better than it was before. Like, yeah, you have Retire now, right? But one is tied behind GB2, and so it has to be second stride, or at least if you want all the effects at least. I don't actually remember the cards GB2 or not, but if you want like the Retire effect and the crit, you need face-up Aura Geysers, and you can't get them unless it's your second stride. So there's that. Aura Geysers retired being completely random does not help either. And the deck just... And the fact that the deck needs to play crits to like maximize its chances of getting the retire off, like the grade 0 crits, kind of sucks. You kind of don't want to be playing grade 0s in this game, to be honest. So, just a bunch of issues. If any deck is forced to play aggro triggers for whatever reason, this deck being it needs to push, and it's needed for the game plan of the for Doom to actually hit green ones or lowers off to get the retire. Probably isn't a good deck. That's why stuff like OTT that needs to play aggro triggers to play is not good in this game. And I think the same thing goes for Claret. Being forced to play aggro triggers is never a good thing if you're like forced to do it to actually win the game. So yeah. So that's it for my tier list this month. Tell me what you think about it down below in the comments. I'm very open to feedback. I do read all the comments. So yeah, tell me what you think about it down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.